Hey, everybody, welcome. Once upon a time, when I was 12, 13 years old, I would gather with my friends and we would play D&D. And it wasn't one or two or three friends. We would have the entire neighborhood. We had 8, 10 players and a game master, and we'd run these adventures. We would run them all summer long and sometimes during the school year, during breaks, all kinds of stuff like that. And it was a lot of fun. And even combat was a lot of fun. You think about how do you go have 8, 10 players running combat, and it worked. And we just followed a lot of guidelines and ways in which we did stuff, both us as players and us as game masters, because we all took turns running the game. And so when I look at combat now in modern gaming systems like Pathfinder and D&D, we see that a lot of those games and the game systems themselves sort of expect you to have 4 players and a game master. And the question is, well, can we actually play these games with 6, 8, even 10 players? Is it feasibly possible? And I'm here to tell you it is. In our live play, we often play with 6 players. And I've played in groups around town and with other friends that have 7 and 8 players. And we were able to make it work. But to do so kind of requires you to have just a slightly different mindset, or more precisely, to take the advice you generally get for smaller groups and really expand on it. So I think I'm going to talk about some ways in which you can approach the game if you know you're going to have 6, 7, 8 players in your game, to help your combats run a little better. Outside of combat, there's a whole other set of rules, but I don't think I wanted to mix up the two. I wanted to focus on combat because that seems to be the most problematic to begin with. I think if you can nail combat, the next steps will become easier. So let's kind of talk about that. So we're going to just throw some options out for you. Not all these options are going to be great for every table, and you're probably not going to do all the options all the time, but these are just things to think about as you are getting ready to run a table with 6, 7, 8, maybe even 10 players. So let's get started here. We're going to talk about players. We're going to talk about starting encounters. We're going to talk about enemies, and we're going to talk about maps. So that's what we're going to do. Hope you want to stick around and join us. And if you like this content, please do like the video and give us a subscribe. I'm trying to build the channel as best I can. And we're just going to take it one video at a time. Cool. So let's talk about players. And players includes the game master, because the game master is a player. You know, you are one of many people at the table. When you have 8 or 9 players and that's 10 people around the table. Even with 6 players, that's 7 of you. That's a lot of players to have around a table. So when you are running a game, first thing you want to do is just reiterate to everybody that this is a game with a lot of players in it. And so that's going to require everyone to make some concessions at the table to allow everyone to be there. Not every player wants to do that, but that's okay. Maybe this game isn't for them. And if you have 9 players and one person wants to bow out, that's really not the end of the world. But we try not to. We try to be inviting to everybody, inclusive to everybody who wants to come in and play. And so these rules, you have to make sure you let everyone know the way you're going to run the game is going to be really to help them as much as you. So the first thing I would say is when you have a large group of players, you want to restrict your character builds. You want to restrict them to avoid homebrews or crazy builds that where people are trying to bring crazy combinations together. That doesn't mean that they can't have multi-classing in D&D or have Pathfinder where they have uncommon or rare or something like that. You can do that, but I would from the outset set some strict build guidelines. Some games like Pathfinder are very much more rigid. D&D has a lot more ways in which you can kind of build your characters, but you want to make sure that you keep it contained. Try primarily with abilities that might cause you to have real challenges in managing the game, such as having one character that has flight or burrows or can do things like teleport. Things like that can really cause a lot of problems. That's the first thing. The second thing is you want to, when you're talking about combats, you're going to want to tell a large group, if a character wanders off and does a combat, You may do that like as a skill challenge. You may just do some kind of rolls to let them get around it. That's really up to you as a game master. I would highly discourage characters running off and doing combat on their own with one character. It's going to be difficult. One of the ways you can get around that is let them encounter an encounter for 8 characters with themselves and let them run. Maybe they come across it and they flee. And if they don't flee, you as a game master has to be strong enough to say, okay, you're going to go against a encounter built for 8 characters. You're going to go by yourself. Let's see what happens. So that's really important to have those characters be constructed in a way in which you can keep control out of it. So it's important in a large group for whether you're playing in combat or not in combat, for you as a DM to be very strong and fair, especially with a large group. And that starts with saying no to certain things that characters might want to be from players. You also want to let your players know that if they're going to plan on doing some strange combination, or if they have something pre-concocted, that they should talk to you about it before the game. So you want to make sure that you try to push off as much of the conversation outside of the table. Because when you have so many people, the last thing you want to do is have 8 people there and 7 people get out their cell phones. It's very difficult to get them back into the game once they sort of drifted off. And let people know that you're not going to partake in conversations at the table. And if they pull some shenanigans, which players will do, let them know that you are going to make fast decisions, that you're going to try to get the quick decision, that it might not be the decision they like, but it's the decision that you're going to stick with for that game, and then you'll reassess afterwards. So quick decisions are fundamental to running a large group. And when you have 2 or 3 players, you might be able to get around a 5-minute conversation about how a certain ability works. When you have large groups, you just don't want to do that. And it's really for everyone else's sake. And if you keep your players informed that these decisions are being made so everyone else can have a good time, I think that will work. Finally, when players are interacting at the table, you want to make sure that when it's their turn, that you let them know, because this is a large group, they need to take their turn quick. You're not going to allow them to open books up and review their characters and ask other players questions and things like that. If you have 7 players or 8 players and when you're going, or when one of the other players is going, that's a lot of time, even figuring out what's going to happen after they make a decision. They say they're going to attack the enemy. Well, now they have to roll to attack. They may have to roll damage. They may have multiple attacks. They may be moving. They may, like having a bonus action in D&D, or if you're in Pathfinder, you're going to have your 3 actions and maybe you have a minion you're moving. There's a lot of things going on. And if you do that 6 times, that automatically takes a lot of time. That should give your other players plenty of time to decide what their first and second options might be. Let them know, come up with a first option, come up with a second option. You as a game master have to be strong enough to tell people what the limits are. Do you do like a 5 count, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1? Do you give them 30 seconds? Do you have an egg timer? Do you have something? But you have to be strong enough to say, when you hit that mark, your turn is done. Maybe you're in D&D, you're dodging, or in Pathfinder, you've raised your shield and you're waiting. Whatever the ruling may be, you have to explain to your players that this is to keep everyone moving and have a good time. And honestly, I've been doing this a long time. My players, if you watch our live streams, we rarely have to wait for players to make decisions. Most of the waiting is actually comes from me looking up something because I was like, oh, I'm not too sure. I try as a game master also to not take a lot of time. And if I feel like if I'm going to look up a rule and I get 15, 20 seconds into it and I'm not finding it, I just make a call. And I let and my players just accept it because they know I'm trying to be fair, and then I'll revisit afterwards. So as long as you are firm and fair as a game master with a large group, you can make decisions, make quick decisions, and move on. It's not going to be perfect. You're going to make all kinds of bad calls, but that's just part of being a game master. don't sweat it. And if your players get upset because you made that call, say, hey, I hear you. I'm going to make this call just to keep us moving. And after the game, if you want to talk about it, you want to text me, you want to have a conversation afterwards, we'll revisit it. The only time I would say that would be an exception is if maybe like if your character in the game, their life depends on making a call. Like if somebody kicks someone else off a cliff and they're like, can I try to grab the edge? And you're not too sure. I would either take a time to look up the rules, or in that particular case, if you don't know the rules and you don't have a predefined way in which that happens, I tend to lean toward the players. You're there to have fun. You don't want to just ruin a player's day. Players will perish on their own. So you want to make sure that you're not the one causing it. All right. So with that note, we want to talk about how we can start encounters quicker and faster. Well, one of the things that I recommend doing as a game master is that you pre-roll as many initiatives as you can in the encounter. If you are homebrewing something, as you're homebrewing the particular encounter, give all the monsters initiative rolls. Just tell them it's not a +6. Roll a 10, roll a d10, 20, add the 6 or whatever, and say, okay, it's 17 or it's 9. Write it down. That way you're not rolling for initiative at a table. If you have a lot of players, there's other things that are going to happen in the game constantly. So you want to make sure that you don't have to roll for a lot of things that you could easily do earlier. So you could just write that number down and move on. It takes a second to do, especially when you're just like writing it on your off time. The other thing I think is useful is if you're going to have a large number of similar baddies, like a large number of goblins, kobolds, what have you, and their strikes are similar, or they have a very standard way of striking, I would either take standard damage, average damage, or pre-roll the whole line of damage in order on a table. Write them out, use a computer program, do whatever it takes. Just create a whole column of this is the damage the kobolds do with their strike. And then as you make your hits, you just check them off the list. Okay, it did 7, it did 4, it did 3, it did 9. It'll make the rest of the game run faster. For big baddies, BBEGs, that might not always be easy because they're going to have special attacks, but especially if we're going to have a whole bunch of standard ones, I would definitely do that. When it comes to rolling for initiative with large groups, if you're on a VTT, it might be easy for everyone just to roll initiative. Boom, you're all in. If you're not, which a lot of the groups that I play with are just, they sit at my table and we have a good time. You have a couple choices. The classic way of doing this was they would do group initiative, your side, my side. I'm not a big fan of that from the interactive standpoint because I like the idea of the baddies and the PCs sort of being interchangeable. So it's not always the PCs going and not always the baddies going. I think being interlaced makes more interesting combats. So one of the ways you can get around this is that you roll their initiative once at the beginning of every session, and that is the initiative for all combats for that session, and give them whatever bonuses they can reasonably easily give you. So it's in Pathfinder, if you're a rogue and they typically roll stealth for their initiative because that's a Pathfinder rule, just give them stealth and let them put them in there. To be honest with you, for the most part, as long as the PCs don't know when the monsters are coming in, and you've predetermined that, it's not going to make a big difference in the course of the whole campaign. Because this week your rogue may be second, next week they're first, next week after that they're third for the day. It will be fine, and you just get rid of having to do that, especially if you're going to have a lot of small combats that day. Roll one initiative at the beginning of the session and say that's the initiative they are in. You can even have people at the table sit in initiative order. So you can, once combat happens, you can just go around the table and point, and it goes by a lot faster. So that's kind of like how I would start encounters, especially if I have a big table that does not have like a VTT and things like that. So let's talk about how enemies can be looked at for very large combat when you have a lot of people. So first of all, when you're dealing with a lot of baddies, you're going to have a lot of baddies compared to a lot of PCs. If you're doing encounter balance, just because the PC's level, they're going to have a lot more moving parts on the board. So if you do Pathfinder encounter management, you're going to have a whole much more experience points to deal with. You probably don't want to give them a very, very large gap. You don't want to create a very strong PC because Pathfinder math is a little tight. So you want to be very careful. You would rather go wider instead of deeper. In D&D, it's not that much of a problem to have a stronger character, but because of action economy, I like to see more creatures on the board than a fewer number of baddies. If you want to have a fewer number of baddies, we're going to talk about how to make that work a little better. But assuming that what you want to do is you want to clump these baddies into groups. So if you're going to have, like I had an encounter where my PCs were in a situation where they had zombies attacking them, zombie hordes. I think I had like 32 or 34 zombies attacking 6 characters. I grouped them together and I assigned each of them a color. And then on my VTT, I gave them, I put a color next to them to signify their group. So when it was Blue's group, I can see on the board exactly who I have it running. If you are running on the tabletop, there's a couple ways you can do that. You can use things like colored poker chips and put them underneath the players. So go grab a bundle of poker chips. You can get them online very cheap. You can use hobby stores will have different types of tiles of glass, like then you can put your characters on that. What's great about having a tile with like a glass, as you can underneath the tile, you can actually write the hit point damage done, and the PCs can do, the other players can do that for you. So if you hit a certain goblin, if they say I hit that goblin for 4, that player can lift up the miniature and write right on the tile 4. And if there's already 3 damage, you go, oh, it's got 7. And now it gives you one less thing to keep track of. So having a glass tile, which you can get from any hobby store, underneath that has different colors, so you can say that's the red group and also has the number of damage they have, that will help immensely. Because that means that you, if you're not running especially a VTT, don't have to keep track of all of the monster hit points. If you have 32 monsters on the board and you're trying to keep track of everyone's hit points, that is a lot. So let the players do as much of that work as possible by keeping track of those hit points right on the tokens. So now we come to the idea of baddies. So the idea of having more baddies versus stronger baddies. When you have an encounter that you see, you open an AP, you open up an adventure, and it tells you what the monsters are there. Generally speaking, depending on where you're coming from, they're either going to be already balanced or they might already be strained for your group. If your group is super strong, you have a lot of magic items in 5e, it's already going to be weak. I tend to not want to make individual baddies that much stronger. Like, I don't want them to jack up their armor class and jack up their hit points immensely. You can, and there are ways in which you can make that more fun. You don't want to give like, oh, well, they're supposed to be a CR 6 encounter, but now I'm just going to throw in a CR 8 or 10 necessarily. Mostly because the action economy, because you're still going to have one baddie and you're going to have 6, 7, 8 people attacking them. It's going to be very difficult to make your baddie strong enough that they can withstand that. And at a certain point, they get so strong where they may not have any challenge to the group, but the first character they hit, they're going to take out. And it's going to be a can we take this monster out before it takes all of us out? Now, would that be a fun one encounter? Sure, but I don't think you want to do that multiple times. So you want to make sure that you keep your attacks and your damage reasonable for your party, because you don't want it to be not fun. With that, one of the things you can deal with when you have your baddies in the game is making sure that your attacks that they do are not just simply attacking one character all the time. That can be fun. And for example, you can have someone with an undead with a scythe that's his max damage and he swings and hits one character. But what I like to do when I have all these players is I want to have monsters that either are a lot of them or the single monster that does a lot more damage and effect to massive people. If you have 6, 7, 8 people, PCs attacking one creature, it should be sort of epic in that way. And so you want to make sure maybe they have frightful presence. So right away, a bunch of people are going to have negatives or disadvantages or things like that to deal with. You want to have the baddie have like an area of effect spell. Dragons have breath. Wizards are going to have fireballs. There's many different options for like kobolds, bugbears, things like that can cast spells and do some area effect damage. Doing that may not be as effective as attacking one character one time with your claw bite, but I think player wise, from a fun perspective, everyone getting hit for damage, everyone's like, whoa, we're all getting fried. We can't let that happen. The other thing you can deal with when you have for enemies is use the environment. So make the environment have some impact. Maybe they are fighting in rocks that are over a lava pool, and the rising heat is causing damage to everyone every round. That type of stuff really goes a long way, because now you have the baddie who they're attacking, but then they have the environment they have to deal with. The environment is yet another kind of enemy that they need to combat with. Maybe they need to start spending their spells to defend themselves by casting protection spells and things like that. They can't just always go after the baddie. So giving them misdirection. And then the other thing is having baddies have some type of aura of damage. In Rime of the Frost Maiden, there are creatures in there that if you get close to them, their aura is so cold that you just take damage every round. Standing near them, you take damage. Those type of things are a way in which you can have one particular baddie have a lot of effect on a smaller group of people. So if you have 2 or 3 baddies that have aura effect, then you have your fighters and everybody around them. They have to be very careful who gets close, and maybe they need to roll out and they have to use other options. So trying to keep it misdirecting is important for a large group. Not so much if you have just one baddie who stands in the middle of the room and fights, it's not going to be as fun, and you're going to find it's going to be very difficult to challenge your group if it's out of the box. The other thing you want to do for your baddie is focus on mobility. Every PC will tell you that being mobile is pretty important. You look at the monk, that they live and die by being mobile. And your baddies are no different. You want to have your baddies have special abilities that you want to mix up. Don't use the same ones over and over again. Be interesting, but maybe they have a misty step that they can do sometimes, a couple times for the encounter. Maybe they can burrow. They're attacking and then they burrow and they're under the ground and nobody can attack them that round, and they pop up and attack, and there will be a completely different side of the map. And now PCs have to all shift. They go from the front to the back, and now the wizard, who was way in the back, being protected by the paladin, is now in the front line, and make them guess that way. So maybe they can fly. Flying creatures are fantastic for big groups because they can move quite a bit. So again, I wouldn't use these all the time. You don't want to have every encounter being flight unless your PCs have the ability to counter that in some way. But making your baddies mobile really makes them have to constantly switch and change positions. You want to, and I try very hard to make my baddies, especially if they're big baddies, have bigger movement than the standard PC. Make them have to deal with the fact that this creature can move. If your typical movement is 30, maybe they move at 40. Some of your people are going to have to decide, do I use all my movement to get to there, or do I want to change up my tactics? Make them have to think. And with a big group, with a lot of people, different people are going to make different choices, and it will allow them to have to think about what they're going to do for those baddies, which is pretty cool. The other thing I like to do in D&D, they have the idea of legendary actions for big creatures. I like to have a legendary action for more than just the big baddies. Sometimes I only give them one legendary action, or sometimes I will give them all 3. So for those of you who don't like from Pathfinder or whatever, a legendary action just means as a reaction to another fighter to being attacked, they can use they can use 1, 2, or three actions during their combat to react, to do something. Legendary actions tend to have a blurb of special things that they can do. A lot of monsters have them. Making your own legendary actions or giving another legendary action is pretty cool. So, for example, you may have a fighter who has 1 legendary action around, and they can react. And what they can do is, when they get attacked, maybe they can shove someone down. You know, it's not something that is going to completely take out an entire group of 6, 7 people. But if they're able to do that on reaction, that's pretty cool. Or maybe they get a disarm attempt. If you attack them and you miss, they disarm. You as a game master can come up with all kinds of creative strategies in order to give your baddies more actions without necessarily giving them another turn. In Pathfinder, which is a strict 3-action economy, I do something similar where I will take, when the characters get about 7th level, I will start bringing in more actions that a bigger monster can have to make it so I don't have to make it in Pathfinder terms, a +4 monster that's very difficult to hit and has a huge amount of hit points, and the combat goes a long way. I will instead lower their difficulty class, their challenge rating, and what I will do is I will then give them the equivalent to a legendary action, where they get their 3 actions for their round, which they normally have on their turn, and then I give them 3 more reactions on top of their reactive strike if they have one, and each one of those maps to their ability to do something else based on the reactions of somebody attacking them at the end of their turn. It always happens after the PC has done all 3 of their actions, that then in between the 2 players, a baddie can do 1, 2, or 3 actions. They get 3 actions to use on top of their normal actions, and then their skills will be 1, 2, or 3 actions, and they can use those in combination. So if they only do a 1-action attack, they can do it 3 times. If they do a 3-action attack, they get it once. It's really cool because then you as a player, as a game master, can decide when and you want that to happen. So yeah, if you ever played Dragon's Bane, the bigger baddies just get multiple turns, and it makes like a dragon very fierce because they don't just get 1 turn; they get like 3 turns, which is pretty awesome. I think in a tighter game like D&D or Pathfinder, you don't probably want to give your baddies a whole other turn, but you might. If you want to make it epic enough, you could actually just give them another turn, roll initiative twice for them. That would make sense for like a Hydra, which where you have multiple heads. Maybe you say, you know what, I'm just going to give each head their own turn, which would be really awesome because now it makes a Hydra really dangerous. Just but when you have eight players, that's going to really make your smaller number baddies, which you're going to maintain, fierce for those 8 people, and make sure they can hit everybody, not just the fighters. Like I said, area effects, launched weapon attacks, spell effects, things like that. In the olden days of D&D, a lot of things had spell-like abilities. Dragons did, which they do now in 2024. Other creatures had all kinds of spell-like abilities. Giving your random character the random kobold or whatever cantrips to use, so they can fire off in different directions. Easy enough to do, will not break your game, and the PCs will be like, oh my gosh, what's going on? I love it. So and then if you're baddies, if you're gonna have a less number of baddies and you don't want to go wide, and you instead want to just make your baddie a little stronger, you're gonna have to max out those hit points in D&D. The hit points versus the amount of damage players can do, kind of a joke. You can raise their armor class too, give them a bump. You gotta be careful, kind of figure out what your average is. I like to see the typical fighters, the typical melee type of fighters, have roughly like a 15 or better to hit. If it takes on average more than a 15 to hit them, it's not going to be that fun. The combat might not be fun for them. It'll be a struggle. Now, having that be once or twice in your campaign where it's really hard, you need to roll an 18 to hit this thing. They're like, whoa, no, that's impossible. That's going to be really difficult, and it'll be very intense. But you don't want to do that combat by combat. So make your baddies stronger, but make them stronger in a way in which the players can still hit with them. Give them more hit points. In D&D especially, they really use hit points as a way to measure out how much damage a particular creature can take. They want the PCs to hit. They want the PCs to do damage because it's fun. And I agree with them. In Pathfinder, it's going to be less so because you have ways in which you can affect your characters to lower their armor class and stuff like that. But at the same time, I really recommend going wider and not deeper as much as possible, unless the story really calls for it. The last thing I want to talk about is something that I think a lot of people neglect in a game, especially as a game master, thinking about anyway. Sometimes it becomes last minute, and that is the idea of how your battle maps should affect your game. So if you're going to have 6, 7, 8, 10 players at your game, you're going to need some big maps. Okay, you can have small maps, but on average, you're going to want some big maps. If you watch our live plays, our maps are huge. Their maps they're very big. It allows PCs and the baddies to spread out all over the map. It creates isolated pockets of combat where it draws people. Very rarely can a PCs just bundle up. They need to move. And then because they're moving, their special abilities are going to be gathered, really only be able to affect a smaller number of people because they need to be near somebody to be able to do something. If a bard is in the center of the room, but the paladin is 70 feet away fighting a golem, the healing word is not going to work, right? You need to be in range. So now the bard might have to use all of its movement to try to figure out how to finagle. I'm gonna have to move that way. I'm gonna have to use my movement to go there. Maybe it's gonna make decisions. So you have very, very big maps. Big maps, not just big maps, but big rooms. You want to have your PCs be able to move around. I say in general, if you have less than 4 squares, a 10 by 10 area per PC in the game, it's going to be cramped. So if you have 8 PCs, you need like 8 of those 10 by 10 squares in your room to sort of make it maneuverable. So I think that's very important. The other thing, aside from just making big maps, is how you use those maps as a game master. What I like to see in game is that when I'm attacking or I'm making a combat situation, I don't want to have the PCs be able to focus on one thing or one direction all the time. Sure, sometimes that's the case. They're trying to go forward. There's the enemies there. But what I really want to do is I really want to introduce the attacking from multiple directions. When you have 2, 3 players, maybe 4, they're already, you're not going to have that many players on the board, and you're not going to have as many monsters on the board in general. And so you can get away with being a little bit more one directional. But when you have 8 players and you're going to be running like 30 kobolds, you don't want to have 30 kobolds running down the hallway. What you want to have to do is you want to have them come from all directions. Think Lord of the Rings, when all of the different goblins are climbing down the poles all after them as they're trying to go through the mines of Moria. They're just kind of coming from all directions, and the pieces are running and they're trying to get away from them, and they're flooding from all directions. That's pretty cool. Having a big room where the combat starts from the front, but then the doors open or secret chambers open or the floor opens and creatures are coming from different directions all at them. Suddenly they don't have a front line. They have 2 fighters, but the 2 fighters can't be in the front line. Now they have to split them up. And you're going to make your PCs your PCs really have to think about how they're going to deal with the strategy. Also coming in waves. If you want to, you can do multiple encounters in a row, giving almost no time in between them. And in D&D or in most of these games, they're expecting 6 to 8 encounters. Make what appears to be a big encounter really just a wave of multiple encounters with only a round or 2 in between to do something. So wave 1 comes in, they get hit, boom, boom, they get hit. They're like, oh, we got to get out of here. And before they do that, they see on the horizon, here's the next wave. And like, oh my gosh. Yeah, having those waves where you're only calculating a particular one group at a time that's maybe 6 or 8 at a time, but you're doing 2, 3, maybe 4 waves of them after each other, that would be epic. And because there's 8 players, they're going to have healing, they're going to have all kinds of skills, they're going to have a lot of spells, they're going to have a lot of things to take care of these groups. But they can't just do a fireball on 35 people, because you're only giving them 8 at a time. Boom, 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 and letting them fight it out. So that's another way you can do it, is with waves. The other thing when you're looking at a map is you want to make that environment that you have, the map itself, to be a character. So other than just having a big room where people are running in different directions, you want to have the character of the environment to be as much of a hindrance as you can to the party. So for example, the classic one is the bridge across the gorge, where they have enemies on either side, and they're fighting in the bridge in the middle. There's a case where they're coming from 2 directions, they're on the bridge, they have nowhere to go, they have to fight in 2 directions. Do they go that way and fight their way in, or do they go that way and fight their way out? That's a very interesting way to do it. The other thing you can have is, for example, like danger areas, like falling rocks that are happening all around you. They're fighting through a ravine, and every so often the rocks around them are falling around them. And where the rocks land randomly, where you roll in the dice, that area becomes difficult terrain or impossible. And so as the combat goes every round, the map changes. Right, the map is becoming different, and it's random, and that would be very interesting. So things like having like water in terrain, just like golf courses, they put those things in that would be hindrances. You can do the same thing. You might have to make the characters either run around, or if they have special skills, be able to use those to run across the water, to swim across the water, to misty step beyond. Whatever the case may be. But the more opportunities you have to hinder the characters on a map, the more your characters need to use their special abilities to get around it. It will burn their abilities down, and it will also be really fun if they have a way to misty step across this gorge and attack. They're gonna love it. They're gonna be like, wow, look how badass my character is. So that's pretty cool. The other thing you want to do is you can have the map itself change the characters' positions. So I think of like 2 examples of this where I've done it in the past, where I had the characters fighting on a log jam, a bunch of logs that are floating down the river. And the logs, I assigned each log a different 1, 2, or 3 number. And every round I would roll, because the whole thing is kind of going at one pace on the river. Every round I would roll 1, 2, or 3, and then I would roll another 1, 2, or 3. And if I rolled a 2, all the 2 logs, and I'd roll another d6 and roll another 2, all the 2 logs would move 2 spaces down, would stretch out wherever they were at. And so it forced characters who thought they were right next to somebody suddenly to be apart, And so you can do something like that, where the map itself is changing people's location. It's really cool to do for a small group, but for a big group where there's a lot of different moving parts, and there's 8 people on the map, and these big giant maps, and suddenly the rooms change that beyond their control, it's shocking how much disarray they have. The idea is to keep the intensity up, but at the same time make it interesting for 8 people to be in a group and fight and have a good time in combat. And that is a way in which they might be pulling people apart. The other way it might be, you think of like fighting in a ravine, a giant ravine, right? And that at the bottom is the baddie. Maybe the baddie is like a giant snake thing popped up and it's attacking all over the place. But the thing about that ravine is, as characters are standing on it, the ravine is slowly pulling them in toward the creature, right? The Sarlacc pit, where the creatures are getting pulled in. Outside of the attack of the creature, maybe they have to make a save every round, or maybe they have to make a skill check, or something happens. Otherwise, they're being dragged in closer every round, regardless of what else they do. And so they might find their friends are getting very close to being endangered to the bottom of this creature, where this creature is going to gobble them up as they get drawn in. So they want to attack, but now they have to go save their friend. And there's 8 of them. They'll have no problem attacking this creature, but some of them you have to give them things to do. So that's sort of like my best advice I have. That's a whole bunch of stuff there. Let me know how I did. I'm sure there's other things that people will want to add or say that maybe they can expand on stuff I've done. I always like to learn more stuff. So please like and subscribe if you can. And otherwise, we will see you in our actual plays or in the next time we do a gaming talk. I don't know. I should have more friends here next time. So see you then. Happy gaming. Bye.